Good morning. Welcome back to our Ask the Agronomist video series. I'm Kyla Watson here with Phil Latham. How you doing, Phil?
I'm doing great.
Good.
Another beautiful, I can't say spring yet, but
right.
late winter day.
Yes, we're in the transition period, maybe.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. We're getting excited, I think, as everybody is. But yeah, things are looking up.
Yes, they are. I would absolutely agree. And with that, people and farmers are starting to think about planting preparations.
Yeah, we talked quite a bit the last few weeks about potentially some, dry spring conditions. We're going, the drought monitor is still showing it. We're looking at dry conditions. They're talking like maybe a dry year. A lot of those things adding up to we should be thinking about some of these things now and how maybe we can tweak our plans or things that we can do, in advance of planning to, make sure we're doing things right. So we utilize the fertilizer and do the best we can if it does turn out to be dry.
Which serve as an inspiration for this week and next week's topics.
Exactly. Yeah. Too much to talk about in one time, so we thought we'd break it up a little bit and talk about a couple different things. So.
Okay, very good. Well, today we're going to be talking about part one, so we'll be going through two different points of considerations for a dry spring.
Yeah. The first one right off the bat is tillage. One thing I kind of dislike hearing, I'll say, not to use the H word there, but I don't like hearing the stale seed bed thing, and I still hear that thrown around. And in my opinion, we've got technology not only on our planters, but we can get around that. A stale seed bed's not an issue. They make strip fresheners and everything for those that strip till, so you can hit, using a little bit different piece of equipment to freshen it up in the spring and get that soil to, not only warm up faster, move a little more residue, but break it up so you don't have that stale seed bed. But our row cleaners and things nowadays are really important pieces of the puzzle in terms of the planter. Can get around that. So I hate to get caught up on that stale seed bed thing. This is a year that we don't want to get caught up in a lot of tillage. So the biggest point is that if I know last year we got a lot of tillage done. I wouldn't do any deep tillage if you can avoid it, minus some ruts or something this spring, avoid deep tillage at all costs. You can lose upwards of a half an inch of water per acre just doing deep tillage.
Wow.
So even a pass with a field cultivator, you're going to lose about a quarter of an inch per pass. So just think about that. Every pass that you make, whether it's incorporating something or just breaking up to not have a stale seed bed, you're losing moisture. So think about that. Try to plant as few trips as possible and keep them as shallow as possible. This is a case where if you have a vertical tillage tool, I think that'd be a great tool this year to use. Lighten the gang angle up, run it shallow, keep it as shallow as possible so you're not pulling that moisture up and it's leaving the soil. So that's the biggest key is, limit tillage passes for sure.
Okay, well, let's talk about no-till beans then.
Yeah, no-till, in my opinion, if you can no-till, especially soybeans, but I know in a lot of cases we can no-till corn. Like I said, we've got a lot of technology on planters nowadays fully capable of that. If it's dry and if it's warm, that may be a better opportunity to try some of that no-tills, even corn. But in terms of no-till, when you compare no-till and conventional till, you're going to hold about 10% more moisture in the soil profile.
Wow.
So think about that. That's why I think I said last week or whatever, there's an advantage to no-till, to having cover on the ground, especially late in the season. Maybe we don't regret it now, or I should say at planting. Maybe we don't regret it at planting. Maybe we have great emergence and everything. But once things start getting hot, and if we don't have the moisture, then we're really going to regret it come midsummer when they're trying to get into reproduction and determine that, that yield and so forth. So just really important, obviously, the tillage piece, but no-till is going to be to your advantage. So there's lots of research that shows this, but it can hold up to 10% more moisture in the soil profile than a conventionally tilled field.
Okay, so then what about with the row cleaners? What would you say recommendations for adjusting those? Yeah,
we've talked about this before, and we may do a segment 2 out on the planter or something to show some of this, but my biggest recommendation on row cleaners is, if at all possible, maybe invest in some floating row cleaners. They, above and beyond, sometimes can show 5 to 10 bushel on corn difference between having, just a set row cleaner height, pinning it up at one level. Just because you always have that, and we have fairly flat fields, and I've had those on our planter before, and you cannot adjust them rapidly enough, obviously, even from field to field, but within field, you can't adjust them enough to really compensate for that residue that's out there, the terrain and so forth. So having a floating row cleaner that moves the residue that should, does light tillage, and then that's the key, you know, we've talked about, moves enough residue that it does warm up that soil as you put the seed in. So you're going to have that warmer soil temperatures, that radiation from the sun is going to absorb better in the soil and warm up as you move that residue away from the row. So my encouragement would be to really focus on setting your row cleaners and not focus so much on seed bed prep in terms of tillage. You know, if you can minimize that at all and no-till, especially beans and so forth, set those row cleaners up nice, especially if you have floating ones or, you know, adjustable. A lot of people have clean sweep or a version of that that they can easily adjust on the go, and that's ideal. That would be my focus. Make sure all those things are running perfectly this spring and set up so, you know, that they're moving the right amount of residue but not doing too much tillage.
Right. Okay, very good. Well, that's our first bucket, our limiting tillage passes. Let's go to the second half of our conversation for today, a nitrogen application.
Yeah, this is the big one that, you know, actually in my graduate work, I did a whole course on. You know, boring is that? But, you know, there's a lot to talk about in terms of nitrogen, especially when it's dry. So I just wanted to kind of hit a little bit on each point, and that's just essentially the different nitrogen sources. So what can we do to better prepare for spring? Okay. So the first one is UAN. So this is still used a lot, and it's a good form, urea ammonium nitrate. So you have part in urea and part ammonium nitrate. Great source for the plants, readily available quickly, and a lot of people still use it in terms of herbicide. So it goes down as a carrier with the herbicide. You spray it out, it's fast. You can have the co-op do it, whatever, that kind of thing. But obviously, it's on the surface. If there's residue, this is a big problem. Because you can have urea, you know, you can have volatilization. That urea can change with the urease enzyme, convert it into ammonia gas and leave. So you don't want that to happen. So number one, if you can incorporate it. The other option is put a nitrification inhibitor or urease inhibitor on there so that you can reduce that amount of loss, because you can have up to 30% loss, especially if it's warm. So if we, like I said, a lot of this, what we're talking about this time and the next week is about that temperature. So look at that forecast, think about how warm it is and how dry it is, and these things should be what's causing you to maybe change some of those management techniques just slightly. So, you know, if you can't incorporate or don't want to, I understand, but maybe include an inhibitor to keep it from being lost. Okay, that makes sense. So what about anhydrous? Anhydrous is a big one. You know, it's a great form of nitrogen. It's a cheap form of nitrogen, and you can put a lot out there. But in a case where we have a dry year like we're looking at this year, we want to be really careful, because in dry conditions, anhydrous can hurt us in terms of germination. It can hurt the seed, but it can also be easily lost. So I just want to back up for a second and talk about that a little bit, just so everybody understands. So when you put anhydrous ammonia out there, it's NH3. So it's a gas, right? You see it come out as smoke, we call it. It's NH3. But when you put it into the ground, it reacts with water, H2O, gets that extra hydrogen, and becomes NH4. That's what the soil holds. The negative charge in the soil holds that positive NH4 there really well. So if you don't have water or enough water in the soil profile, it can still stay there, but the biggest risk is gas loss out of the seed trench. So number one, make it deeper. Put it in 6 to 8 inches so you know that you're getting it down into moisture, so you're not having an issue there. And so you know that it won't affect that seed. You know, I know last year we talked about a 2-week window. I would say even more than that. You know, you can alter your pattern and how you're doing it in the field. Make sure, you know, if you have RTK, that's an excellent opportunity to go between the rows and then plant in between that. Anything like that to reduce that chance of the seed coming in contact with that ammonia obviously can be burnt really easily. There's a lot of risk there, especially in a dry year. So, you know, the other thing that I would mention on anhydrous is a lot of times anhydrous either gets put on by a co-op or somebody's renting something. If it's your machine, hopefully you're taking the time to adjust all those things, but make sure those cover discs are doing their job. Especially in the dry conditions, you get clods. You know, we always talk about that. Oh, the tillage is working, it's fracturing really well, but we can have bigger clods when it's really dry. You don't have that moisture there to hold those particles together, and it breaks up into clods, and then you can lose that. So that's why getting it down deep enough and then getting those discs to throw it back over top of that, that furrow, that trench that it's putting it in, and covering it up so that it's not lost. Giving it as much time as possible to stay in the soil until it can react with water.
Okay, and then what about urea?
Sure, urea is a great form also for nitrogen. One that's used a lot, especially I'd say even side dressed, but urea is still used even in the spring. It's readily available, but the problem with urea is, especially once again if we're putting it down on the surface, just like UAN, we have that issue with urea being converted, urea hydrolysis, and going through that process with the urease enzyme, which is in the soil, it's in the residue, all that stuff is going to convert it pretty quickly, especially if it's warm, and can be lost as ammonia gas. So just remember that, it's pretty easy to treat that stuff. So just call the co-op and say, hey, I want to put some, treatment on. There's a lot of options, Agritane. There's several other versions of that do a great job at making sure that process stops, that urease enzyme is inhibited so that can't happen as quickly. So.
Okay. Well, is there anything else you would like to add this morning?
The biggest thing in nitrogen is a huge topic, but if you can, try to do some side dress, maybe, now mentally prepare, say, okay, let's spread this out a little bit. Let's do some pre-plant with the anhydrous, and then let's come back maybe in season and feed the crop a little bit more if we have the time. Put it right there when the crop needs it. This might be a good year for that. Maybe more moisture will, you'll start seeing more of that. That'll help everything all around. So maybe just make some of those plans, adjust that nitrogen a little bit, especially if you're planning on doing something like putting UAN out with a herbicide or something. So.
Okay, and if any of our viewers or customers of yours have any questions, of course, call in.
Yep, always available to talk.
Yep, okay. Well, thank you for joining us this morning.
You're welcome.
And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Have a good day.